Hello everyone, welcome back to my exotic animal journey, or however I should be starting these videos. Before I even properly start, I want to apologize for any potential background noise. There are currently 3 things you might hear, 3.5 maybe. My aquarium, I can't really turn off the pump to that. My dog, who's just kind of sitting in the room. The half is the cat outside of my door, who you may every once in a blue moon hear a little cry from, because I'm not giving him my absolute full attention 24/7. And weird little metal tippy taps that are coming from my heater next to me. So, if you hear any of that, I apologize. But today I actually have a bit of an interesting video considering how new this channel is. So in my introduction video, I went over all of the reptiles and amphibians, well, amphibian that I have, but that list has actually changed since that video came out, and we have some new additions in the reptile room. I'm not going to be going over all of them. I'll talk about that another day, but I will be focusing my time on a specific addition. So I'm sure you know from the title and thumbnail or whatever, but I have acquired a juvenile western chameleon gecko, also known as Eurydactylodes occidentalis. Hopefully I'm pronouncing that scientific name correctly. Specifically, oh my god, I can't believe I just said specifically. The species name. He is a 4-month-old male. I got him from a local expo near me. Shout out to Dirt Daddy for being just super cool, really good shop and vendor to work with. And they helped me out immensely. I've only had him for a few weeks as of right now, but he's been an absolute delight to keep. I'm already kind of falling in love with this genus and the species. He's not a huge fan of handling yet, but we've made some progress. I'm going to be trying out some more things tonight to try and get him a little bit more comfortable with handling and that kind of thing. Going back and forth on the way I want to actually get him handling. So if anybody has any good tips, that would be great. It's either I'm going to try and do choice-based handling, or kind of just picking him up and getting him used to it. I'm kind of more familiar with the latter, but I'd like to be more familiar with the former. So I don't know. We'll see. But we have made some progress. He will, if I offer him a spoon and he's not like super, if I can get it close enough to him, then he'll lick it. And he'll eat off of the spoon. So that's nice. But yeah. So in addition to just like showing off my new chameleon gecko, whose name is Winston, by the way, I wanted to talk about chameleon geckos just in general, and I was trying to think of a topic to actually talk about, and I refuse to do a care guide, simply because I've not had him long enough. I refuse to do a care guide on any animal that I haven't had for at least a year, and even then, that's even a little short for myself. So I decided to answer a question that in theory is pretty simple, but actually took me a lot longer than it maybe should have to actually get a clear answer on. And that is, what is the difference between the different chameleon geckos that exists? I thought this would be simple to research, but for some reason I was getting a lot of conflicting information and it was a little confusing. So hopefully this video will be a little bit more clear. So honestly, just jumping right into it. First, there are 4 different species. They're all Eurydactylodes. There's Eurydactylodes agricolae, Eurydactylodes velardi, Eurydactylodes occidentalis, and Eurydactylodes symmetricus. They can all be found on different parts of the island of New Caledonia, so same thing as crested geckos and leeches. To put it simply, since the actual locality doesn't usually matter too much in terms of the way that people are actually researching reptiles, Eurydactylodes agricolae, or agricoli, depending on the correct pronunciation, can be found in essentially northern New Caledonia. Eurydactylodes velardi can be found pretty much anywhere south of the range of agricoli. Symmetricus can be found basically on the southern tip of the island, and occidentalis can be found on a tiny little section of New Caledonia on the west coast. If you want to see a map of their exact range, Cloud Forest Cloud Forest Design or .design has really cool cage cards that have an actual map range of each individual species. So I think those are definitely very useful. I'm not like obviously sponsored by them or anything like that. I use my own cage cards that are not theirs, but I do think they're cool, and I would definitely look into them if that's something that you're looking at, because I think they're a cool company. So onto the geckos. The next way, so other than their locality on the island, and also borrowing genetics because each species is different genetically, the next way that I would say that they vary is in size. Now, when actually researching this, like looking up the average sizes between all of the species based on things like care sheets and people's personal specimens and descriptions of them and like proper scientific descriptions of them, it ended up being kind of simple. Like if I had to order them from largest to smallest, then it would essentially go Agricolae, Velarde, Symmetricus, and Occidentalis, with Occidentalis definitely being the smallest of the group, being about 3.5 centimeters from snout to vent, with the rest averaging between like 6 and 6.3 centimeters. There was some back and forth between whether Eurydactylodes agricolae or Velarde is larger on average. I think Agricolae would win, with Symmetricus being somewhere in between Velarde and Occidentalis, but realistically, Symmetricus, Velarde, and Agricolae are pretty comparable size-wise, especially since all of their adult sizes, even from the biggest to the smallest, are no more than 10 millimeters different from each other. So I wouldn't really use size as a huge identifying factor between them, especially since reptile sizes can vary greatly in general, just in any species. And especially since it also depends on gender. Gender is a huge factor when it comes to how big these animals can get, with females getting usually much bigger. So, take size as you will. But physically, they all do have subtle differences, and they're like just anatomical structures, which is the primary way that most people will be IDing which species is which. So, Agricolae, to me, is the most distinct. They have a yellow slit that connects in the corner of their lip to their ear. Symmetricus also has a similar connection from the lip to the ear, but also has very large scales on the top of their head, as well as a bump on the nape of their neck. And in addition, Agricolae also has very small and more angular scales on the top of their head. Pretty simple. Occidentalis can be a bit hard to tell apart from Velarde. One of the things is that, for the most part at least from what I've heard, they don't have a slit. Velarde definitely doesn't have a slit. I have heard that Occidentalis can have a slit that goes from the mouth to their ear. That's they all have a slit, but it's whether it's continuous or discontinuous. Discontinuous means that it just kind of there's a cutoff in between, and continuous means it's just one big straight line. Also, I apologize if my cat is very audible. I hope not, but I shall move on. But for the most part, both Velarde and Occidentalis do not have the slit. So the biggest difference is on their scalation. Occidentalis tend to have more like bigger, more quote unquote randomly placed scales than Velarde. And then according to, and this will vary based on individual, but on average, I've also heard that Occidentalises tend to be a bit more colorful, more greens, whereas Velarde tend to be more like tan colored overall. Obviously, that's not huge method of identification, but I thought it would be worth mentioning. Finally, this is not really for identification purposes, but if you're looking at the price of these animals, that tends to be where the biggest difference lies. Agricolae, I've seen for like trying to get a good average or a good range based on expos and websites and Morph Market. I find that agricoli range from around 100 to 150, velarde similarly around 100 to 150, maybe a tiny bit more expensive, but like I've seen them, pretty comparable. Occidentalis tends to then jump to around 200 to 300, and then Symmetricus goes to between like 400 and 550. Obviously, it'll vary depending on where you get yours from and the genetics and a bunch of other information, but I think these are pretty good averages. So basically, let's say you're looking at a random chameleon gecko. Let's say you have a friend that goes up to you and they're like, hey, which species is this? To identify it, this is the way that I personally would do it. First question is, does it have a slit from its mouth to its ear? If yes, then it is almost definitely either agricoli or Symmetricus. And then to tell them apart from there, do they have the bump on the top of their head, and what do the scales on the top of their heads look like? If they're big and round, then it's Symmetricus, but if they're small and angular, then it is agricoli. If it's not either of those, then that means it's either velarde or occidentalis. And you will essentially base that almost purely on things like scalation, colorization, slightly on size. And I'm sure that there are more differences anatomically between velarde and occidentalis, but like I said, the research was surprisingly more difficult. Realistically, they are all very similar. I honestly, I would make your decision if you're looking for this video to ask which one you should get. This can be kind of an annoying answer for some people, and I totally understand that. But honestly, I would go with whichever one you like the best. Don't base it on color, because they can change color similar to a crested gecko, almost like firing up and firing down. Mine can range from like a tan color to like a really dark, like green and almost gray. So don't base it on color. So that means basically on scalation and size and stuff like that, which all can vary anyway. So price is going to be the biggest difference. One other aspect I decided I wanted to talk about was their differences in care. Now, from doing basic research, you will find that there is essentially no real difference in any of their care. The only real difference I've ever seen from care sheets is like breeding guidelines with Symmetricus. I've also heard specifically from a person who has worked with the species, with Symmetricus specifically a lot, that they require slightly higher humidity. Take that at your, do your own research on that, obviously, but I think that would be, potentially important information. But with all of this said, I also would like to acknowledge that every single one of these species, like I mentioned at the beginning of the video, come from a different part of the island. For example, if you look at this description written about the natural habitat of velarde, which I'll actually throw it up on screen, it mentions that they occur in more humid forests, and it mentions like the different types of vegetation, whereas occidentalis actually reads it comes from like more dry forests with the two localities on the west coast. Basically, these two differences in description would seem to indicate that there are measurable differences in things like their climate for each of their respective regions that could potentially influence their captive care. Now, for anyone like myself that is new to keeping this species, I certainly wouldn't recommend branching out into like more advanced care like that. I would not try and experiment with humidity levels too much. I would stick to what people are actually doing and what is being proven to work. I've been keeping reptiles for a long time, so I feel comfortable taking specific liberties, but also don't be arrogant. This is a species I've personally never worked with up until recently. I've only had him for like less than a month. So, like their care, I'm not saying it's hard. It's pretty much exactly comparable to a crested gecko, but, still do your own research, do as much research as possible. So for anyone that is interested though in their wild history or conditions, or just simply interested in their care to begin with, like if you want to do more research and you're using this as a stepping stone, definitely would recommend this paper that I got the descriptions of the velarde and occidentalis from their wild conditions. It's the review of phylogeny and the New Caledonian Diplodactylid gecko genus Eurydactylodes. The title will be on screen. This was a really good read and definitely helped me when it came to describing them, or not describing them, but like for how I want to build their environment and that kind of thing. So, you know, I would definitely give that a read if you're interested in doing more research on this species. So I think that's pretty much it. He, like I said, has been a delight to keep, and I really wanted to talk about these guys because I definitely think they're underrated, which I've heard from a lot of people. I'm sure if you watch any like reptile YouTubers, you might hear this species and talk about how underrated they are and all that. And they really are underrated. They are not like many other geckos that I've seen. And if you are even remotely interested in things like crested geckos or chahuas or any other New Caledonian geckos, definitely look into the Chameleon Gecko. They're small size, but like relatively tame personalities. They're not darty like morning geckos. You know, and it's kind of hard to believe when you hear that because they're so small. They're like practically the size of a morning gecko. It's kind of insane, but they are very delightful little lizards, and I would recommend that everyone at least just look into them. Thank you very much for watching. Hopefully this was somewhat informative. Hopefully you enjoyed the little clips of my new little dude. I will hopefully be able to update you guys on his progress in terms of handleability, and like I said, if anybody has any advice for whether it be working with this species specifically or anything like that, definitely give me a shout, comment, whatever. And thank you very much. Like I said, hope you've enjoyed the video.